opening clip was convicted felon Donald Trump getting booed at a Washington Commanders Detroit Lions NFL game in Maryland. Welcome to Gaslit Nation. I am your host, Andrea Chalupa, a journalist and filmmaker and the writer and producer of the journalistic thriller Mr. Jones about Stalin's genocide famine in Ukraine. The film the Kremlin doesn't want you to see, so be sure to watch it. And this is Gaslit Nation, a show about corruption in America and rising autocracy worldwide. We are the first and your leading news source for winning World War III. Only this time, we are defeating the Nazis on U.S. soil. And plot twist, just like the Russians launched World War II with the Nazis, they launched World War III, only this time they're not switching sides. Like World War I and World War II, those were each marked by major changes in warfare technology. World War III is a war of fascist-backed big tech hacking minds. We see this, and they brag about it. Gil Duran of the Essential Reich newsletter and the recent guest for his number 2 appearance on the show shared this quote by Peter Thiel protege Balaji Srinivasan. "It's a mistake to think a second American Civil War would look anything like the First Civil War, or like World War II for that matter. It'd be nothing like the movies, with huge movements of uniformed soldiers, tanks, and planes. Instead, it'll just be a continuation and escalation of what we've seen over the last several years. A network-to-network war to control minds, rather than state-to-state war to control territory." Yeah, that's what I've been saying. The fascists are saying it, and I've been calling this for years, even before launching Gaslit Nation. That's why I had to launch Gaslit Nation. We've been in World War III for a while. As a security expert in Kiev back in, let's say, I think it was summer 2015, this British security expert who had been on one of the last planes, he claims it was the last plane to get the hell out of Iraq when ISIS was taking over. He was in Kiev, we're chatting, and he said, World War III has already started, the West just doesn't know it yet. And that is what helped get Donald Trump elected in 2016. Many people out there are acting like the world will go back to normal. If we only defeat Trump, we'll get our country back. But that is not how this works. The fascist virus has been awakened thanks to deeply funded social media bots and influence networks. We all saw Benny Johnson, Tim Pool getting hundreds of thousands of dollars from Kremlin cutouts. And of course, complicit social media companies like Apple, Meta, all of them. The culture wars are now heating up in the UK with the same engine behind them. This is what tipped the very close Brexit vote with militarized propaganda tech, Cambridge Analytica. And they're doing all this, again, ramping it up to take back Great Britain for Putin-loving Nigel Farage. And that's even after all the destruction that Nigel Farage and Putin-backed Brexit has caused for the British people and for Europe. So as badly as the Brits have been hurt by their very own Brexit vote and from the mind hacking that went into tipping that extremely close election, Nigel Farage is making a comeback in the UK. That's the power of the mind hacking we are up against in World War III. And it comes, of course, with political violence. Havana syndrome injured around 1,000 men and women who served in the CIA, FBI, and other government-related groups and their families. And then, of course, MAGA mass shooters. The political violence crisis is concretely coming from the far right. That has been the warning of experts who study the data, and including our own FBI, during the rise of Trump with birtherism, which the first Black First Lady said put a target on her head and her family. Now, speaking of the UK, the British government said that it will no longer share intelligence with the US about suspected drug trafficking in the Caribbean because Trump and crackhead Ken, Pete Hegseth, are sadistically mass murdering boats in the Caribbean. And that is illegal. And the British do not want to be complicit in mass murder. And that is a British government currently under Labour. But that policy, of course, could change if Putin fanboy Nigel Farage gets his British MAGA party back in power. So, yes, everything looks very grim. But like World War II, in this World War III, Antifa will win. How do we know that? Because when we study the memoirs, the interviews, the documentation of the resistance, large and small, to the Nazis, people said again and again, I don't know what came out of me. I just had something in me that rose up and met the moment. We defeated the Nazis because regular people found a superpower in them to fight for life. The armies of life, which are Antifa, will defeat the armies of death, which is the fascists. Whatever you want to call them, America First, MAGA, Nazis, Soviets, Mussolini, whatever label you want to put on it, it's the armies of death. And life will win. Life always wins. Just look at evolution. Life is extremely stubborn. Okay, so we're going to win this one. All right, and speaking of winning, remember the euphoria we all bathed in collectively from Election Day just a week ago, from sea to shining sea. We dominated. Mississippi, we dominated. The blue tsunami showed up. So what does the Senate do in response? What it was designed to do. The Senate panicked. Senators, including 8 Democrats, and that includes 1 independent who votes with Democrats, and their corporate donors, panicked. They pushed the panic button this past weekend, pushing through a weak deal for the American people, giving in once again to Trump's fascist oligarchy. The system was designed this way. The Senate deal this past weekend is not a flaw, it is by design. The Senate and the Electoral College ensured the people would be ruled by the elites, the land-owning class. The progress we enjoy today was hard fought. People put their lives on the line so that women could vote, so that Black people could vote, so that Native Americans could get some rights and recognition. This isn't me being woke. This is American history. There is a reason why it's not taught in schools and why they're attacking universities, because college campuses are where young people finally learn about the people's history of the United States. Once they learn, they want to build a better system to create a freer and fairer world for all. MAGA, the foot soldiers of the oligarchs, attack our schools because ignorance is slavery. Some of you out there might be thinking, well, the Democrats had to make a deal. Airplanes were about to fall from the sky. And don't worry, they'll get their vote for Obamacare and force Republicans to be on the record ripping away health care from millions of people. And we can fight again in January when another budget battle will be looming. But here's the thing. Republicans can't be trusted to bring a vote, certainly not in the House. Here's MAGA Nazi House Speaker Mike Johnson.
I'm not promising anybody anything. I'm going to let this process play out. I'll tell you what they wanted. I'll tell you what Schumer and Jeffries wanted. In fact, Chuck Schumer said it publicly and decried that Thune and I would not go in a back room with them and make a four corners agreement on Obamacare subsidies. And I said, there's no way. That was never possible or appropriate.
Now, there is some good news. Adelita Grijalva, the Democrat-elected congresswoman in Arizona, will finally be sworn in 7 weeks late. But is it too late? Obviously, MAGA is desperate to make a deal with Democrats to make the Epstein files go away. MAGA will try to trade that Obamacare vote in exchange for never bringing an Epstein vote. And if that doesn't work, they're counting on a big race in Tennessee between Republican Matt Van Epps and superstar state rep Afton Ben. The Tennessee hauler recently confronted Van Epps at the airport.
Matt, funny running into you here, Matt. How are you?
How are you?
I'm good.
How are you?
So Afton was on with us yesterday, and she said that Speaker Johnson is waiting for you to get there so you can cancel out Adelita Grijalva's vote on the Epstein files. What do you think about that? Does that sound right to you? Do you think that's Speaker Johnson's plan? Why was it so hard for you to answer the Epstein files question, Matt? Is that why they put $2 million into your race so that you would go there and help cover up the Epstein files? This is a simple question. You said you're for transparency. Why not just be strong about that, Matt? Why do you have to hem and haw so much? Do you think that's the plan, Matt, to get you up there to cancel out Adelita Grijalva?
That's how MAGA plans to block an Epstein vote. So even with Grijalva in Congress, the big Tennessee race on December 2nd could give MAGA the votes they need to block the Epstein files. Mike Johnson could swear in Van Epps a day after he wins his special election. That is, if he wins. So if you want those Epstein files, which are just the tip of the iceberg of alleged pedophile Trump's 15-year friendship and alleged crime spree with confirmed pedophile Jeffrey Epstein, do everything in your power to help Afton Ben win the special election in Tennessee on December 2nd. Make phone calls, send text messages, raise hell on social media. That is an election we have to win. The big picture is this. 250 years ago, America was born with some seriously dangerous compromises like protecting slavery as the British Empire was in the process of phasing it out. The first American Revolution defeated the biggest empire in the world. The Second American Revolution ended slavery with the Civil War. The Third American Revolution established civil rights and defeated Jim Crow. America is long overdue for a fourth revolution to end the oligarchy and prevent the next Trump. We need to bring back Reconstruction and finally see it through this time. We need Nuremberg trials for the many crimes against humanity carried out with our tax dollars by Trump's ICE Gestapo. Those dreams for our country are the same dreams of Martin Luther King Jr. and civil rights, of all the community organizers who came before us and fought hard for the progress many take for granted today. That is why the betrayal of the 8 Democrats, including that one independent, that block of 8 in the Senate, that betrayal is inexcusable. America needs bold, tough backbone leadership to fight for the dreams of a more perfect union. We will not get a fourth American Revolution, Reconstruction, and Nuremberg trials without moral force. What we witnessed of those 8, and of course the others who secretly encouraged them, was a criminal lack of courage and imagination. It was simply inexcusable. Here are their names. The independent Senator Angus King of Maine, who gaslit Americans by saying that it's impossible to stand up to Trump. Here's the clip.
Well, Joe, you have to go back to what the strategy was at the beginning of the shutdown. There were 2 goals, both of which I support. One was standing up to Donald Trump. The other was getting some resolution on the ACA premium tax credit issue. The problem was the shutdown wasn't accomplishing either goals, and there was practically, well, there was zero likelihood that it was going to. In terms of standing up to Donald Trump, the shutdown actually gave him more power, Exhibit A being what he's done with SNAP and SNAP benefits across the country. Oh, by the way, Joe, you're going to love this. Guess who's getting paid during the shutdown? Not the park rangers or air traffic controllers, the ICE agents. Under special law, under that big, awful bill that they passed last summer, the ICE agents are being paid. Nobody else is. So standing up to Donald Trump didn't work. It actually gave him more power.
And the others include Senator Tim Kaine of Virginia, Senator Dick Durbin of Illinois, who's retiring, Senator John Fetterman of Pennsylvania, Senator Maggie Hassan of New Hampshire, Senator Jeanne Shaheen of New Hampshire, who's retiring, Senator Catherine Cortez Masto of Nevada, and Senator Jackie Rosen of Nevada. Again, 2 senators are retiring and the rest don't face re-election in 2026. And that's why the Democratic Party establishment led by Chuck Schumer had them be the ones to take this vote. Do I want Schumer to resign as Senate leader? Yes. Do I want the Senate to be abolished because it was designed to protect the elites, including elite criminal impunity, like slavery? Yes. Is Congress George Carlin's big club and you and I are not in it? Yes.
They don't want people who are smart enough to sit around the kitchen table and figure out how badly they're getting fucked by a system that threw them overboard 30 fucking years ago. They don't want that. You know what they want? They want obedient workers. Obedient workers, people who are just smart enough to run the machines and do the paperwork and just dumb enough to passively accept all these increasingly shittier jobs with the lower pay, the longer hours, the reduced benefits, the end of overtime, and the vanishing pension that disappears the minute you go to collect it. And now they're coming for your Social Security money. They want your fucking retirement money. They want it back so they can give it to their criminal friends on Wall Street. And you know something? They'll get it. They'll get it all from you sooner or later because they own this fucking place. It's a big club, and you ain't in it.
Just look at Progressive Congressman Ro Khanna of California. He's the first member of Congress to call for Schumer to resign as leader. But guess what? Ro Khanna invested in Peter Thiel's Palantir, a big tech big brother that's currently embedding itself across our government in a massive surveillance state to map Americans. So what's the solution? It's not like we need to trust somebody. We need to have some people in power who are actually fighting for us. The solution is us. The solution is the people. The people are the ones who have agency here. Just ask Ukrainians. And if you want to fight like hell and usher in the Fourth American Revolution, go to the Gaslit Nation Action Guide at gaslitnationpod.com. That is your roadmap on where to start. At the Gaslit Nation Action Guide, we list actions large and small that you can do wherever you are in the world to chip in, because it is going to take all of us to fight for a better world, because a better world is possible. We know this. We are standing on the shoulders of giants who've been here before, and now it is our turn. Like all those Antifa before us, we have something in us, and it's mad as hell. We're in this very fight for our lives together, for the future, for each other. And remember, believe your eyes and your ears. That is how we get through it. To help us get through it, we have a special historian on the show who's an expert on some of the darkest chapters in American history, including the Holocaust and Russia's 200-year quest to conquer Ukraine, which will never happen. He fears something greater than a MAGA dictatorship, and that's an American Civil War. On this show, we're joined by Evgeny Finkel, a professor of international affairs at Johns Hopkins University's School of Advanced International Studies, author of 3 acclaimed books, including Intent to Destroy, Russia's 200-year quest to dominate Ukraine, and a contributor to outlets like The Washington Post, The Los Angeles Times, and Foreign Affairs. Finkel brings deep insight shaped by a global life. Born in Lviv, Ukraine, now based in Bologna, Italy. We are so honored to get his perspective here on Gaslit Nation. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
All right, so one thing I keep telling myself to stay grounded in the chaos here in the U.S. is that, all the comparisons between Trump and Hitler, Trump and Mussolini, Germany and Italy and Austria, those were countries that were devastated by the Great War, which saw millions of bodies all across Europe. Europe was just a mass grave. People were deeply traumatized. The economy was in ruins. And so this was a level of carnage that history rarely sees on this scale. And you had advancements in technologies, killing machines, and so on. So massive dystopian trauma for Europe. Out of this hellscape crawl these demons, obviously Hitler, Mussolini, and it was like the temperature was just right for them. Where in the United States, Americans are we're used to a certain type of customer service, if you will, and a certain type of lifestyle. We as a nation spend countless millions of dollars on Halloween costumes for our pets. So it seems unimaginable that we're going to get a madman dictator on that scale. And certainly the elections we just had were just a massive euphoria of like, no, thank you. We don't want Project 2025. We do not want a dictatorship here. What do you see as a historian, as well as somebody who comes from a family of Holocaust survivors? What do you see in terms of the conditions here in the U.S. for an actual dictatorship to take hold in this moment?
Right. So, I'm in this weird position where I'm an American, and I work for a U.S. university, but I live in Europe, so I'm looking at both as an insider, as an as an outsider a bit. What do I see? I mean, again, speaking like an expat, I mostly try to make sense of what exactly is going on in the US, and just by reading the news, on the one side, you mentioned all those Halloween parties and costumes. On the other hand, I used to live in Washington, D.C. area, which is essentially under military occupation right now, and we see, I see ICE and CBP and other federal agencies going through Chicago and other places arresting people. So right now, I think I see a lot of chaos and a lot of just trying to understand where things going. And you're right, it can go in very different directions. Some of that will be correction of the stuff that the current administration is doing, but it can also easily get much worse and much more violent and much more autocratic as we go.
A Russian friend in 2016 said, "Oh, you're not going to be Russia. You've got stronger institutions." I'm like, "Are you sure about that?" Because these institutions let Trump, a corrupt career criminal with all of this backing over the decades from dirty Russian money, certainly being laundered to his properties. Are you sure about that? Like our intelligence community, the deep state, if it existed, it would have stopped him. What are your thoughts on that?
If the deep state existed, then it now would be probably the time to show that they exist. But more seriously, so I heard that in 2016 and, in the lead up to the last election in the US, that somehow institutions are going to save us. So, there are guardrails and the system is much stronger than that. And apparently it's not. I used to say everyone that if you think that institutions alone are going to save us, no, they are not. Institutions are people, and whatever people do in those institutions is exactly what's going to happen. And right now, we do see quite a lot of people in the administration hell-bent on breaking those institutions. So no, I do not think that, that stuff that is on paper or even in law, or even as norms is going to save the democracy. If anything, those are only the U.S. citizens who can save the U.S. democracy if it comes to saving the democracy in the U.S.
Based on your years of research, what would that look like, Americans saving our own democracy?
Well, let's start with voting and elections. There were elections last week. There are midterms coming up. Not taking stuff for granted when politicians tell them that things are fine or it's going to be okay. Actually, also believing politicians when they say that they are going to do some pretty horrible stuff and not dismissing it. When they're telling us that they're going to, wreck those institutions or deport millions and millions of people or destroy things, yeah, they probably mean it. And, and we shouldn't be dismissing them and saying, no, they're just, too cynical, too strategic, too crazy. We actually had this experience with Putin, for instance, when he told us quite openly what he's going to do and what he believed in. And, all the community of Russia experts and all the foreign affairs people said, no, he doesn't really mean it. He's just, coercive diplomacy. He's too cynical for that. He's too concerned with his money and the acts he's not going to do it. But, apparently if the lesson is, then we should believe people when they tell us what they're going to do.
Yeah, Hitler wrote it all down in Mein Kampf.
We are definitely not anywhere near that yet, but yeah, I think we should take politicians at their word. And if they tell us we're going to wreck those institutions and change some stuff, yeah, probably they will.
When a dictator is rising, there's always an opposition party, and there's always elites within those opposition parties who can't make up their minds on which side of history they want to be on. And that's, of course, what Hannah Arendt said. It's like what it comes down to is just most people do not make up their minds to be good or evil, and they just think that history is something that's done to them. Life is just done to them instead of the fact that they themselves as an individual have agency. How would you describe in the Democratic Party establishment? We just saw this sudden Senate deal that was pushed through by a group of Democratic Party moderates in the Senate who don't need to face the American voters again because they're either retiring or they don't have an election for a very long time. The American people, especially the voters who delivered such a historic election last week, are stunned and they feel betrayed because Trump is getting booed. His approvals are tanking. The election last week was a mandate on Trump and Trumpism. And that should have been wind in the sails of the Democrats to stand strong in this government shutdown. But instead, you have Democrats caving. It's hard for people to understand that these dictators don't just rise because they're a seductive alternative or they're just so scary that people just get out of their way. There's also opposition that pre-surrenders, that obeys in advance or is morally bankrupt or financially bought off in some way. What's the sort of historical context of how you would see the Democratic Party establishment reacting to Trump today?
Comes from not taking the other side seriously. Exactly the things I was talking about. Answering your last question, so believing that the rules of the game remain the same even when they change. Kevin came in exchange for some vague promise for some woe down the line, very unlikely to ever come. It's not just moral corruption. Quite a lot of those people are just well-meaning and simply cannot grasp the history they're living. There is also another process that's going on, and that's believing that, by small compromising this or by playing by the rules or by staying within the system rather than walking out, they can, maybe do some good stuff on the margins or prevent worse, really bad things from happening. And it accumulates to a point where, the line is crossed and there are no good things to do. And the worst things are already here. And I think quite a lot of that is happening within the Democratic Party right now. This belief that, the rules of the game remain the same. When the other side tells us what they want to do, they don't really mean it. That they're being cynical or strategic. And just, this politics of small compromises and delivering on the margins without recognizing that, it's the entire nature of the game that's at play right here.
Exactly right. And it's that normalcy bias, that desperation to believe in business as usual, which obviously undermines our institutions. It's not just that. I hate this sort of simplistic conspiracy theory that both parties are in some Superman villain ice cave together, plotting to take over the world, and we're all just pawns in their game. It really does come down to people just being that stupid, just not taking history seriously.
Yeah, no, I don't believe, I don't believe there are grand conspiracies here. And it's actually not, it's not stupidity. Those senators are not idiots. It's more trying to do the good thing on the margins or just being used to working in a certain way and refusing to accept that the rules have changed. And it's not just, it's not just the US thing. We see similar stuff going on pretty much everywhere. The American democracy is not immune to the problems that plague democracies everywhere else. We're not unique.
What is a way to get through this? Like, if you were to sit in a room with the Democratic Party establishment, like Hakeem Jeffries, Senate Majority Leader Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, let's say replacing Schumer, if you were to be in a room with all of them, as a historian, what would you advise?
The easy thing to advise is just wake the hell up. Shake off your pre-existing beliefs. We're in a new, horrible position to be a Democratic politician right now. So many is happening, and the zone is being totally flooded, and you don't know what to respond to. Yes, absolutely. And, I sympathize with, with their situation. The problem is that they're still sleeping. So just, wake up, smell the coffee, and do something.
Smell the fascism.
Also, smell everything that's burning, and quite a lot of things are burning.
Right. You can't play with the rule book when the rule book's on fire. In your view, what is the worst case scenario for America right now? How do you see that in because in all the years of research you've done, it's like in your DNA, in your muscle memory. Like I get flashes. So what are the flashes that you get in terms of our worst case scenario?
I do bad things that happen to good people for a living. So there are many very bad scenarios I can outline. And honestly, autocracy wouldn't be the worst one. So it can easily, with the polarization and the violence that's going on the street, I can easily see it escalating at some point into a civil war. It's not in the realm of the impossible. It can happen. some sort of a secessionist movement, or California or Chicago or something, or even Texas declaring that they don't want to play this game anymore and declaring independence or trying to break the union. It's also a possibility. I mean, we have seen it before. It's not something that I'm completely making up. The U.S. have lived through that, and it certainly can happen. So, on the grand scheme of things, I think autocracy is not the worst thing that can happen to the U.S. Not that it's a good scenario, but I think we should be seriously thinking about much worse things happening.
A civil war. I agree.
A civil war, yeah, absolutely.
And not only the many millions of people who will die in a civil war, but also think about what that's going to do to our property value, guys. Let's not do it. Let's not go to war.
Yeah, although, if you are dead or displaced, then you probably don't care that much about the property values. And again, it's not that, it's not that I like this scenario. I'm paid to think about, bad things that might happen down the line. Yeah, and the possibility is small, but it can happen. It has happened before, so we should definitely, keep that in mind when we think about the future.
Yeah, there was a Russian political scientist who predicted that the Soviet Union would collapse. And then he predicted that the United States would break apart. Even if the midterms are euphoric and it's a repeat of the victories across the country that we saw last week, there's still this horrible tendency in the U.S. to swing back and forth. So every election is a smackdown against the incumbents, whichever party's in power. What do you see in terms of this swinging? How do you see that potentially stopping?
No, of course, it's not that, elections might go in either direction, but the polarization and the cleavages and the divisions are not going to go anywhere. And, the crazy fringes of both the left and right are not going to go away. Though right now I'm actually much more concerned about people like Nick Fuentes than the Antifa or whatever they might be. They're not going to disappear. So
no, Antifa is a safe zone here. Antifa stormed the beaches of Normandy. We're okay with Antifa. It's the nihilists on the left who were telling us for years that there's no war in Russia. It is a proxy war by the CIA and all of those tankies. That's the left that I can't stand. The saboteurs, the hope police, as I call them. Like anytime we get any sort of victory, they have to find a way to sabotage it with their nihilism. Anyways, but go on.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, they're not that different, from the Tucker Carlsons and the Nick Fuentes of the world. I think they would be perfectly fine sitting together in a bar or, in the administration for that matter.
So I want to ask about international law, accountability, rebuilding from the ashes. You and I connected over social media because we were among the early ones in 2022 saying, you know what, this looks like genocide, what Russia's doing against Ukraine. And there were people, screaming at us, randomly, passively watching this war going, this can't be genocide because it doesn't. I'm like, the Russian state TV is telling us it's genocide. And obviously you had the think tank elites who promised us that Kyiv would be conquered in 3 days and just give up, Zelensky, get out. It's very clearly genocide over there. And so I wanted to ask you about forcing any sort of accountability for Russia's genocide and also for Gaza as well and what's happening in Sudan. Why do you see us living in this age of genocides, and how do we force accountability in order to finally say never again?
Right. So unfortunately, I don't have any good news here. And, when I started talking about genocide, when it applies to Ukraine in 2022, it was because, first, analytically, I believe that it is genocidal. And since then, the Russian state TV and the Russian politicians only reinforce those perceptions, both by rhetoric and actions. But I also believe that those labels actually mean something. So for me, when President Biden came out and said, yes, it's a genocide, I expected that something would change, that, that weapons will start flowing, or that will have some meaningful policy change, or, as you said, accountability. And unfortunately, I don't believe it anymore. And I think that all those debates about, Gaza and Sudan that are driven not just by trying to understand what's happened, but by, a policy hope that if we just use the G word, then something will change will change on the ground. I think they failed to catch up to this new reality that those labels actually not that meaningful. So it doesn't mean that that I lost hope or that there will be no accountability, but I think that we need to rethink what it means and where it comes from. ICC is not going to do the job for us, neither when it comes to Putin. I mean, he's still in power and he's still able to travel or with Netanyahu or with other bad actors. So the hope that the Hague is going to solve our problem, unfortunately, they won't. What can solve the problem is internally. So I think that for Russia to get out of this war and truly rebuild itself, those people need to be on trial in Russia proper. And the same goes for Israel, and the same goes for Sudan. And we just need to insist that, by we I mean, the U.S., European powers, that those countries actually followed through on that, and stop doing business as usual with people like Putin or Netanyahu.
I thought it was really interesting what you said in an interview where Putin looked to the U.S. and Israel and pointed out their moral inconsistency, where the U.S. was staunchly on the side of the war criminal, Netanyahu, but then against the war criminal in Russia's invasion of Ukraine. And he was playing up that moral inconsistency and saying, see, the U.S. just has a cynical agenda in Ukraine. Ukraine is just a pawn in their game.
No, of course, there is cynicism, and politics is cynical, and they believe that some people have that that the international humanitarian law or human rights simply just fall upon us from the sky and suddenly become policies. It that's just not how politics is, and that's why if we want to see those people on trial, no matter where they are, we need to start domestically and changing our own behavior and our own policies. But politics unfortunately will always be driven by interest, but it doesn't mean that we should completely subvert our interest to criminals.
How would you advise us to start now documenting Trump's crimes against humanity? People are getting kidnapped off the street by ICE. We don't even know if they're federal agents or not. I mean, anyone can dress today as a federal agent, kidnap someone off the street, and they're getting sent to countries that they're not even from, into prison systems where the human rights record is abysmal. These seem like right cases to be documented. Obviously, as you said, there is a role for the international community. The ICC exists for a reason, but the pressure has to come internally. What would you advise Americans to do to force some accountability here at home? Because everything we're seeing very much feels like the rise of authoritarianism if we don't document it, expose it, and force some sort of legal action and consequences to stop.
So ICE and what they do, from what I see, does seem to be quite well documented. The question is what is being done with that documentation and what follows, whether there are there are investigations or prosecutions or some legal accountability by state or local level authorities by those actions. So I'm actually among what the current administration does. I'm less concerned about documenting the ICE actions than what is going on with those boats in the Caribbean that are being bombed for absolutely no reason from what we see, or absolutely no legal justification, and it's a kind of fleet black hole where we don't really know how many of them been blown up until the Department of Defense or Department of War says so, until we see some evidence. That's when it comes to international accountability and just lack of evidence is what I see a much bigger challenge. And that's why journalists and human rights organizations need to be focusing on, because on the streets of Chicago and Washington, there are other ways to document it. When we're talking about documentation, the Caribbean is something that I'm much more concerned about.
And it's harder to document because who's
Absolutely,
out there? Yeah. So the resistance to Trump, again, is global because we need to build bridges with any groups on the ground there that have any chance of filming what's happening. And what's dangerous about this lawless mass murdering, which is what the U.S. military is doing, is that it is a recruitment tool. It attracts people that want to do that are attracted to that violence. And so their numbers strengthen. And so the people that don't want that, they resign, as one of the military leaders did in that operation. And so what you're stuck with is a bunch of sadists at the command, and it gets harder to get them out of power. The urgency is very real. I want to ask you about this big progressive shift we've seen in many parts of the country, certainly New York City electing its first Democratic Socialist mayor. One thing we've seen across the progressive movement, not all of them, of course, there is an isolationism there. This feeling of any involvement anywhere around the world is automatically George W. Bush's invasion of Afghanistan and Iraq. Those were very traumatic conflicts. They were driven by literally lies, media complacency, media propaganda. Everyone was buying George W. Bush's talking points. And so as a result, you do have this resistance movement with a strong movement within it for isolationism. And that includes blaming the victim, blaming Ukraine for its own invasion, saying, well, there's fascists in Ukraine and so on and so on. We've already put you in a room with the establishment Democrats. If you were to be in a room with the progressives who are driving a lot of the change we desperately need in America, but then also have a blind spot when it comes to foreign policy, what would you say to them?
From what I see from the outside, this non-intervention or isolationist mood is there, probably with the exception of Israel-Palestine, where it does not exist. So I'm waiting to see at least some student mobilization around Sudan. I'm old enough to have seen it happening in the U.S. not that long ago, when college students were all about Darfur, and now nobody cares about Darfur, no matter how many people die, including in places that are connected directly to UAE that funds this genocide. I'm pretty angry about this blind spot among the US left, who know how to mobilize around Gaza and around Palestine, but not every other parts of the world. So my message would be, first, the world is, you can do both. You don't have, to pick and choose. And if you really care about human rights, then human rights are everywhere and for everyone. And if you don't care about them elsewhere, then eventually they will come after you. And you will have to deal with them at home. And at that point, it might be already too late.
Our discussion continues, and you can get access to that by signing up at the Truth Teller level or higher on Patreon. Discounted annual memberships are available, and you can give the gift of membership. Bonus shows, invites to exclusive events, get all shows ad-free, and more at patreon.com/gaslit. That's patreon.com/gaslit. Thank you to everyone who supports the show. To help Ukraine with urgently needed humanitarian aid, join me in donating to Razom for Ukraine at razomforukraine.org. To support refugees in conflict zones, donate to Doctors Without Borders at doctorswithoutborders.org. And to protect critically endangered orangutans already under pressure from the palm oil industry, donate to the Orangutan Project at theorangutanproject.org. Gaslit Nation is produced by Andrea Chalupa. Our associate producer is Carlin Daigle, and our founding production manager is Nicholas Torres. If you like what we do, leave us a review on iTunes. It helps us reach more listeners. Original music in Gaslit Nation is composed by David Whitehead, Martin Vitzenberg, Nick Farr, Damian Arriaga, and Carlin Daigle. Our logo design was generously donated to us by Hamish Smythe of the design firm Order. Thank you so much, Hamish. Gaslit Nation would like to thank our supporters at the producer level on Patreon and higher. Ice Bear is Defiant, Lily Wachowski, Ruth Ann Harnish, Todd, Dan, Milo, and Cubby, Ann Bertino, David East, Diana Gallagher, D.L. Singfield, Jans Alstrup Rasmussen, James D. Leonard, Jared Lombardo, Joe Darcy, John Schoenthaler, Katie Masuris, Kevin Gannon, Kristen Custer, Larry Gasson, Leah Campbell, Marcus J. Trent, Mark, Nicole Spear, Randall Brewer, Sherry Escobar, Ellen McGirt, Carol Golstad, Tanya Chalupa. Work for better, prep for trouble. Thank you all for your support of the show. We could not make Gaslit Nation without you.